1. First, real is a word that we may call substantive hungry. Consider, these diamonds are real. These are real diamonds. This pair of sentences looks like, in an obvious grammatical respect, this other pair. These diamonds are pink. These are pink diamonds. But whereas we can just say of something, this is pink, we can't just say of something, this is real. And it is not very difficult to see why. We can perfectly well say of something that it is pink without knowing, without any reference to what it is. Not so with real. For one and the same object may be both a real X and not a real Y. An object looking rather like a duck may be a real decoy duck, not just a toy, but not a real duck. When it isn't a real duck but a hallucination, it may still be a real hallucination, as opposed to, for instance, a passing quirk of a vivid imagination. That is, we must have an answer to the question, a real what, if the question real or not is to have a definite sense, to get any foothold. And perhaps we should also mention here another point. The question real or not does not always come up, can't always be raised. We do raise this question only when, to speak rather roughly, suspicion assails us. In some way or other, things may be not what they seem. And we can raise this question only if there is a way or ways in which things may be not what they seem. What alternative is there to being a real afterimage? Real is not, of course, the only word we have that is substantive hungry. Other examples, perhaps better known ones, are the same and one. The same team may not be the same collection of players. A body of troops may be one company and also 3 platoons. Then what about good? We have here a variety of gaps crying out for substantives. A good what? Good at what? A good book, perhaps, but not a good novel. Good at pruning roses, but not good at mending cars. 2. Next, real is what we may call a trouser word. It is usually thought, and I dare say usually rightly thought, that what one might call the affirmative use of a term is basic, that to understand X, we need to know what it is to be X or to be an X, and that knowing this apprises us of what it is not to be X, not to be an X. But with real, as we briefly noted earlier, it is the negative use that wears the trousers. That is, a definite sense attaches to the assertion that something is real, a real such and such, only in light of a specific way in which it might be or might have been not real. A real duck differs from the simple a duck only in that it is used to exclude various ways of not being a real duck. But a dummy, a toy, a picture, a decoy, etc. And moreover, I don't know just how to take the assertion that it's a real duck unless I know just what, on that particular occasion, the speaker has it in mind to exclude. This, of course, is why the attempt to find a characteristic common to all things that are or could be called real is doomed to failure. The function of real is not to contribute positively to the characterization of anything, but to exclude possible ways of being not real. And these ways are both numerous for particular kinds of things and liable to be quite different for things of different kinds. It is this identity of general function combined with immense diversity in specific applications which gives to the word real the, at first sight, baffling feature of having neither one single meaning nor yet ambiguity, a number of different meanings. 3. Thirdly, real is, like good, a dimension word. I mean by this that it is the most general and comprehensive term in a whole group of terms of the same kind, terms that fulfill the same function. Other members of this group, on the affirmative side, are, for example, proper, genuine, live, true, authentic, natural, and on the negative side, artificial, fake, false, bogus, makeshift, dummy, synthetic, toy, and such nouns as dream, illusion, mirage, hallucination belong here as well. It is worth noticing here that, naturally enough, The less general terms on the affirmative side have the merit, in many cases, of suggesting more or less definitely what it is that is being excluded. They tend to pair off, that is, with particular terms on the negative side, and thus, so to speak, to narrow the range of possibilities. If I say that I wish the university had a proper theater, this suggests that it has at present a makeshift theater. Pictures are genuine as opposed to fake. Silk is natural as opposed to artificial. Ammunition is live as opposed to dummy, and so on. In practice, of course, we often get a clue to what it is that is in question from the substantive in the case, since we frequently have a well-founded antecedent idea in what respects the kind of thing mentioned could and could not be not real. For instance, if you ask me, is this real silk? I shall tend to supply as opposed to artificial, since I already know that silk is the kind of thing which can be very closely simulated by an artificial product. The notion of its being toy silk, for instance, will not occur to me. A large number of questions arises here, which I shall not go into, concerning both the composition of these families of reality and unreality words, and also the distinctions to be drawn between their individual members. Why, for instance, is being a proper carving knife one way of being a real carving knife, whereas being pure cream seems not to be one way of being real cream? Or to put it differently, how does the distinction between real cream and synthetic cream differ from the distinction between pure cream and adulterated cream? Is it just that adulterated cream still is, after all, cream? And why are false teeth called false rather than, say, artificial? Why are artificial limbs so called in preference to false? Is it that false teeth, besides doing so much the same job as real teeth, look and are meant to look deceptively like real teeth, whereas an artificial limb perhaps is meant to do the same job, but is neither intended nor likely to be passed off as a real limb? Another philosophically notorious dimension word, which has already been mentioned in another connection as closely comparable with real, is good. Good is the most general of a very large and diverse list of more specific words, which share with it the general function of expressing commendation, but differ among themselves in their aptness to and implications in particular contexts. It is a curious point of which idealist philosophers used to make much at one time, that real itself in certain uses may belong to this family. Now, this is a real carving knife, may be one way of saying that this is a good carving knife, and it is sometimes said of a bad poem, for instance, that it isn't really a poem at all. A certain standard must be reached, as it were, even to qualify. 4. Lastly, real also belongs to a large and important family of words that we may call adjuster words. Words, that is, by the use of which other words are adjusted to meet the innumerable and unforeseeable demands of the world upon language. The position, considerably oversimplified no doubt, is that at a given time our language contains words that enable us more or less to say what we want to say in most situations that we think are liable to turn up. But vocabularies are finite, and the variety of possible situations that may confront us is neither finite nor precisely foreseeable. So situations are practically bound to crop up sometimes with which our vocabulary is not already fitted to cope in any tidy, straightforward style. We have the word pig, for instance, and a pretty clear idea which animals among those that we fairly commonly encounter are and are not to be so called. But one day we come across a new kind of animal, which looks and behaves very much as pigs do, but not quite as pigs do. It is somehow different. Well, we might just keep silent, not knowing what to say. We don't want to say positively that it is a pig or that it is not. We might, if, for instance, we expected to want to refer to these new creatures pretty often, invent a quite new word for them. But what we could do, and probably would do first of all, is to say it's like a pig. Like is the great adjuster word, or alternatively put, the main flexibility device. by whose aid, in spite of the limited scope of our vocabulary, we can always avoid being left completely speechless. And then, having said of this animal that it's like a pig, we may proceed with the remark, but it isn't a real pig, or more specifically, and in using a term that naturalists favor, not a true pig. If we think of words as being shot like arrows at the world, the function of these adjuster words is to free us from the disability of being able to shoot only straight ahead. By their use on occasion, such words as pig can be, so to speak, brought into connection with targets lying slightly off the simple, straightforward line on which they are ordinarily aimed. And in this way we gain, besides flexibility, precision. For if I can say not a real pig, but like a pig, I don't have to tamper with the meaning of pig itself. But one might ask, do we have to have like to serve this purpose? We have, after all, other flexibility devices. For instance, I might say that animals of this new species are pig-ish. I might perhaps call them quasi-pigs or describe them in the style of vendors of peculiar wines as pig-type creatures. But these devices, excellent no doubt in their way, can't be regarded as substitutes for like, for this reason. They equip us simply with new expressions on the same level as, functioning in the same way as the word pig itself. And thus, though they may perhaps help us out of our immediate difficulty, they themselves may land us in exactly the same kind of difficulty at any time. We have this kind of wine, not real port, but a tolerably close approximation to port, and we call it port type. But then someone produces a new kind of wine, not port exactly, but also not quite the same as what we now call port type. So what are we to say? Is it port type? It would be tedious to have to say so, and besides, there would clearly be no future in it. But as it is, we can say that it is like port type wine, and for that matter, like port too. And in saying this, we don't saddle ourselves with a new word, whose application may itself prove problematic if the vintners spring yet another surprise on us. The word like equips us generally to handle the unforeseen in a way in which new words invented ad hoc don't and can't. Why then do we need real as an adjuster word as well as like? Why exactly do we want to say sometimes it is like a pig, sometimes it is not a real pig? To answer these questions properly would be to go a long way towards making really clear the use, the meaning of real. Incidentally, footnote, nothing is gained at all by saying that real is a normative word and leaving it at that, for normative itself is much too general and vague. Just how, in what way, is real normative? Not presumably in just the same way as good is, and it's the differences that matter. It should be quite clear then that there are no criteria to be laid down in general for distinguishing the real from the not real. How this is to be done must depend on what it is with respect to which the problem arises in particular cases. Furthermore, even for particular kinds of things, there may be many different ways in which the distinction may be made. There is not just one way of being not a real pig. This depends on the number and variety of the surprises and dilemmas nature and our fellow men may spring on us, and on the surprises and dilemmas we have been faced with hitherto. And of course, if there is never any dilemma or surprise, the question simply doesn't come up. If we had simply never had occasion to distinguish anything as being in any way like a pig but not a real pig, the words real pig themselves would have no application, as perhaps the words real afterimage have no application. Again, the criteria we employ at a given time can't be taken as final, not liable to change. Suppose that one day a creature of the kind we now call a cat takes to talking. We make a distinction between a real X and not a real X only if there is a way of telling the difference between what is a real X and what is not. A distinction which we are not in fact able to draw is, to put it politely, not worth making.